Hey everyone, it's Christopher Swan, and welcome to this week's episode of Living Your Journey. Each week, I get the amazing opportunity to chat with people that love what they do in life. They understand their passions. Maybe it's a career path or the social impact that they're making. It's kind of like they're following their North Star. Even though their story may change, they understand that they're on their journey every day. Today, I had a great conversation with an artist I really admire and have been following online for a while. If you're a Disney fan, then you've probably seen his work, especially if you're at all familiar with the Hipster Mickey illustrations. Freelance artist Jerrod Maruyama has been creating wonderful illustrations and character designs for clients like Disney, Warner Bros., Nickelodeon, Hasbro, Mattel, and so many more. And I absolutely love his work, just like so many other people across the world. In our chat, Jerrod and I talk about why he started freelance illustration, great moments in his career, what it was like for him when his work became more popular, things that inspire him, and we cover a lot more. His perspectives are insightful and interesting, obviously for artists, but just as interesting for non-artists as well. Jerrod is so easy to talk to, and it's really evident in our conversation. I felt like I knew him for years, like a good friend. I think you're going to enjoy this interview, and when you check out Jerrod's work, I think you're going to be a fan too. Okay, here we go. Jerrod, it is so great to have you on the show. You just heard me say earlier that I'm kind of a super fan, so I'm trying to not let that come through in the interview, but thank you for coming to the show.
Oh, well, thank you for having me, and please let it come through.
Well, thank you for letting me do that. I probably will admit then, like every morning, my coffee mug is of your work. So actually, I think I've been the person who's introduced your work to other people.
Well, thank you.
As well. And I think a friend of mine, he's even met you at one of your signings.
Oh, really?
So literally, this is like this full connection for me. So I'm super excited about that. I'm excited just, not only do I enjoy your work, but I think it's, you probably have a great story to tell. And I think that people are really starting to get to know your world and your character design and your illustration.
Oh, well, thank you. I appreciate that. It's been a whirlwind for me since starting work with Disney and stuff. And I kind of have to sort of reflect myself and sort of, gather my thoughts on sort of how quickly things have happened.
Oh, good. I'm glad you said that too, because I do want to hit on that in a little bit too and talk about that quickness and maybe some of the popularity. But let me pause for a second and just introduce you for our listeners. So I have Jerrod Maruyama, and you are based in, and if I'm correct, Sacramento or right outside of Sacramento? Okay. And you're a freelance artist, but you really specialize in illustration and character design. And obviously very successful. For the folks that don't know him, you definitely have some wonderful designs through Disney, so many of them. But I think there's a lot of probably popularity around your Hipster Mickey and Minnie designs, as well as I think Star Wars, it's got to be very popular as well. So I probably have not done you justice, but at least that gives, I think, a summary of maybe where people might have heard of your name or seen your work.
Sure. Yeah, I think that's fair.
Okay. Well, then let me dive in a little bit to current world then, because what I really want to know is, set that stage a little bit more for some of the more work you're doing today and what that looks like. So let's talk about you're a freelance artist, right? And you're fully focused on illustration and character design. What does that look like for you today? Is it clients? Is it multiple clients? And what kind of work are you really doing maybe besides Disney?
It's kind of the joy of doing freelance is that you get to do quite a few different types of jobs and illustrations and things like that. I do work for Disney quite a bit, the level of work that comes from them sort of comes and goes. So it just depends on when you catch me and what I'm currently working on. But most of my clients come to me for character work, cute character works, as you said, sort of at the top of the show. Mm-hmm. However you would see a character and wherever you'd see a character, that's where my clients are coming from. So whether it's a logo or for merchandise, for a toy or something like that, they really come from all walks of life. So So right now, primarily, I've been working on some big projects for Disney, so that's been taking up the majority of my time. But I'm always doing stuff for other clients, smaller projects that I can squeeze in sort of between deadlines.
And so thinking about, we mentioned even before we started the show too, that, about this sort of like you have a set schedule. There's a certain time that you sit at your desk and, you're really trying to dedicate that time. So as you're working on that, because you're freelance, this is kind of why I'm thinking about this, for the folks that have a 9 to 5 job, even if they're an illustrator or they're an animator or whatever, they still have kind of these set hours. So for you with clients, is this like a feast or famine experience? Or are you still steady work where you're like, yeah, it's Monday through Friday, I'm still working at my office?
Um, I have been fortunate that it has been steady work. One of the biggest challenges I think for freelance artists is getting used to the unevenness of the rate of work. So you might have something for a whole month, and then you have a quiet time for about a week. And the challenge for me over the years has been to not panic during that week, and to just know that something will come up, something always comes up. You still have these moments of insecurity where you're thinking, oh, this is it. I had a good run, but it's all over now. But, the longer you do it, the more you take advantage of that time to sort of either do personal projects or to sort of get inspired again so that you're ready when that next job comes. And then usually after you have that break, you get more than enough work in the next week. And, you were kind of wishing you took it a little more easy the previous week. So
Is that, you said you've been kind of lucky or, also that time where don't freak out within that week. Mm-hmm. Has that mostly been the case for you as you've been doing freelance work, or was it different in the beginning? I asked this question too, because I definitely have friends in the creative space, and it is that kind of, that's why I mentioned feast and famine. In the beginning, it really can be this, there's more downtime than there's uptime. Has that been an experience for you as well? Or has it just luckily been steady ever since?
Oh, no, definitely. I went into freelance because I was laid off from a previous job, and I had all this time on my hands. And instead of waiting around to get, another staff job or for an opportunity to present itself, I just started doing freelance to take up all that extra time. Because in reality, applying for a job and stuff, it does take a lot of time and effort to do that, but it certainly doesn't take your whole day. So that's basically how I got into it, sort of out of necessity, to have money coming in. So I used that time to sort of develop my work, do a lot of smaller projects, whatever I could get. I wasn't picky about it. I just needed to get work under my belt and professional work in my portfolio. The beginning's always rough, I think, with anything. And I came to freelance a little later in life, so it might have been more frightening because, as you get older, you need the money to come in more consistently than you did when you're younger. So that, that's always a great motivator to have you get work and to stay inspired and to be, sort of hustle to get work. So I think that was definitely the case for me. It started off slow and I've built up to this point where I have more consistent work.
Yeah, that makes sense. You said something there that I've read this about you in an interview previously and I thought, oh yeah, this makes a lot of sense. You talked about advice for others, for other artists about, just show your work and, make sure you just get it out there and really show it and keep showing it to people. The exposure is really helpful. Still thinking that you probably, or that you might believe in that phrase or those comments that you had made. Was that something that as you were doing that and you were kind of like not picking off the work that you need to do to be, consistent income coming in. Has that been something for you as well, that you were just showing your work, getting it out there, and making that name for yourself?
Absolutely. I think it's ongoing. And I don't think that's not specific to me. I think that's everybody. Anyone who's working in the visual arts has to sort of, I wouldn't say stay relevant, but you want to stay in the public eye. You want to show that you're doing current work, that these aren't items in your portfolio from 6 months or a year ago. It just depends on what you're doing, what your goal is and things like that. Since I'm freelance, I feel the need to stay as current as I possibly can. If I had a staff job or something like that, I might be more, might take sort of a backseat to what I was doing at my regular job. But I don't know. As a freelance artist, I feel I have to post as often as I can, whether that's professional work or personal projects.
Yeah. Okay. And I think that all makes sense. I mean, I see that as well, and that's kind of the world I live in. I'm not creative in that space, in illustration, but I think it does make sense. I'd love to talk a little bit more about, because I do want to talk about your past and a little bit about, maybe unpack a little bit more about that being laid off and
Sure.
in that space of, like the freelance and why stay in it. But what I'm curious about is I'd love to just kind of pull apart the whole like visibility, popularity, the whole like Hipster Mickey and that space. Now, I hone in maybe on the Hipster Mickey stuff because that's where I was introduced to your work. I was on a business trip in Florida, and I went into the gallery, in what was it, downtown Disney, and I saw some of the work, and I was like, what is this craziness that was so great? And I was like, I think I bought everything I could find. And then I looked you up, and I had figured it out. And that was the first introduction. I was like, oh my gosh, who's this guy? So for me, that was the big aha moment of seeing your work. Was the Hipster Mickey, or did you have something else that was working before that became more of your, I think, larger, or entrance into a larger audience?
I think Hipster Mickey, went a long way. And I think I would have to say that's probably my most visible piece that I've done, especially for Disney. And then that hopefully, gets people interested in the other things that I do. It's a little bit different than what I do for the majority of my work, which is sort of these cute, Japanese version-y cute of the characters and things like that. So it's kind of two-sided there. But the Hipster Mickey seems to have sort of transcended like a genre. And it's kind of reached a wider audience that, you can't even predict something like that. It just happens. It's its own thing, and you're just happy to be a part of it. So, but I think you're right. I think you're like many people who first saw my work because of that version of the mouse.
Yeah. And since that evolution too, has that changed, like not just the awareness of your work too, but like maybe just like the visibility and maybe popularity of your work? Like, have you noticed a larger audience of people on social media or more interactions since that?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, I think every artist, especially working in this type of field, this illustration and merchandise and things like that, you're always hoping for something like this to sort of somehow touch, people's consciousness about what you're doing, about the characters and the work that you're doing. It has afforded me a lot of different opportunities just because of this one image and this series of images. So, I think everyone hopes for that kind of one thing to sort of strike.
You mentioned about the opportunities too. I've been really just curious about this. How has this really changed things for you, now, like for your work and the way that maybe you approach work? Because I would think that there could be a negative to it and there also could be a positive. It's almost like, I think about like celebrities, when they start to become a real celebrity, like it's the person was waiting for this, they can do more work. They have great new opportunities, but they also talk about how isolating it can be as well, because now so many more people want to talk to them and on and on. It makes me think a little bit about, obviously it's a different genre of work and what you're doing, but I wonder if there's any kind of similarity for you with now that you have a larger audience as well and social is so interactive. Do you find that you have this, maybe both sides of the fence of, great opportunities and maybe a negative that goes with it?
I get a lot of clients that are asking for things that are similar, which can be frustrating because you want to say like, I can do all these other things, but you're getting a lot of people that are coming to you because they saw this one thing, whether it's Hipster Mickey or something else, and they're kind of asking you to sort of recreate that exact thing, and one that's kind of not possible. Like those things happen so rarely that it's not just a matter of recreating a style or, putting a fedora and a scarf on a character and now it's...
That's not the trick you mean?
Yeah, exactly. But it's hard to convince clients sometimes that that's the case. So I would never want to seem ungrateful for the opportunities that I've been presented because of Hipster Mickey. But yeah, I do get a lot of requests for the same kind of thing. And that can be a little frustrating. But again, it's that's a much better problem to have than to have people completely uninterested. So
Yeah, I would imagine. What about the opportunities? You had mentioned that earlier. Has this like opened up more doors for you to even work with different kind of clients or try new work?
I think so. Yeah. One, I've gotten a lot of work within Disney with other divisions and things like that. But just in general, you do. I don't know if it's because of the specifics of Hipster Mickey that it gets people who might not normally notice Mickey Mouse to sort of take a second look at it. And so then you get some people who aren't necessarily huge Disney fans, but respond to that image and therefore continue to look at your work or, find out what else that you're doing. So, yeah, I think it's been helpful in attracting all types of clients.
Yeah, that's great. Well, I mean, that's good to hear too, because I would imagine, especially for folks that are in that creative space, it's like you said, you can't, or you don't want to, or you can't recreate the same thing you've already done. And as an artist, gosh, you probably wouldn't want to. How boring would that be? You want to do new things and try new stuff. So there's opportunities, hopefully do thrive and bring that new opportunity for you.
Right. Yeah. I mean, I think that's where it's nice to work for an art director who happens to also be an artist. I think they understand that from a creative point of view, as opposed to someone who might just be more concerned about selling something or, reaching the widest possible audience. I think there's two ways to approach that. And usually artists are pretty good about understanding that, you don't want to keep repeating the same thing over and over again. And that's not going to be my best work.
Yeah, absolutely. You just mentioned the art director piece, and that's a perfect segue because I do know that you have played that role in multiple organizations previously to being a full-time freelance artist. And when I did a little looking, I also noticed that some of those were organizations like in Silicon Valley. And knowing that I believe that you are originally from San Jose, is that right? Yeah, okay. Yeah. Well, which would make sense about the Valley stuff.
Right.
I'm really curious about understanding a little bit about like before freelance, before you went into that direction, art direction for organizations like that are in Silicon Valley. I think Riverbed was one of them. Do I have that right?
River Deep.
Yeah. Okay. Mm-hmm. So just thinking about some of those, like what was that world like for you back then? Because I mean, clearly you must be doing some art and you were doing some educational, I think, organizations. So I'd love to, I'm probably rambling on and not quoting them correctly at all, but I'd love to understand a little bit about that background before you were freelance artist. What was that like for you?
Well, I went to that, my illustrations tend to, they're great for kids, I think. I think that's people's first thought is these would be great for kids. And so that's why I went into that field originally as sort of a graphic designer, as an artist to create these graphics for educational software and things like that. From there, I was promoted to an art director, and that's sort of how I got to that other side of it. And again, it's at that time when you're working and you get a promotion and you kind of have to go with it and take the more money and just keep moving forward. So I did get sort of stuck in that track for a while. It took me a little bit away from the creative, but I did enjoy very much working with artists and finding artists and, researching their work and trying to find good fits and things like that. And it certainly has informed my career as a freelance artist, knowing what types of things art directors are looking for and what do they appreciate when they're searching for artists to work with. And
that makes sense too. I agree. Like, and it's interesting. You refer to it as a trap a little bit, that promo piece, and it's easy. I think the older we get, we do get kind of that, this feels good. Well, of course, it's more money. It's interesting. But I think it does, that art direction, even though I haven't played that role, I would imagine it does give you a different perspective now, knowing what it's like to work with an artist from a different role. So now back as an artist and more creative, you can understand that direction further. So it was probably really, I almost think beneficial to probably where you're at today.
Absolutely. Artists, as the stereotype goes, probably we're not the most, responsible bunch. Some of us are, some of us aren't. But I found that went a long way. Someone could be an incredible artist, but if you couldn't count on them to deliver on these deadlines, then it didn't matter. So you would take maybe a slightly lesser artist if they were responsible and could hit the deadlines and turn things in on time, and really deliver from that point of view. Because it's not just a personal project you're working on. You've got a lot of people that are counting on you to deliver this stuff. And the last thing you want to do is calling people all through the night trying to find out where their files are or, what happened. So I think I've gotten a lot of work just by being sort of responsible. I think you keep clients by being that way.
It's funny. I could just, even by hearing like the way you talk, Jerrod, like your tone of voice and whatnot, it really does sound like you do have that whole like line of like responsibility. Like you could be really creative, but I can tell like it just, you do seem like, but you got to do things like in the right way. And, you have a budget, a timeline, and that's super smart.
Well, thank you. Yeah, I mean, you want the client to feel confident after they get off the phone with you that you're not going to just disappear or something like that. So, I mean, and that goes both ways, right? You certainly, I've had clients that are like that on the other end where you're worried that I don't think I'm going to get paid on this one. So,
I can imagine. So, you mentioned that it was the transition for you was you were laid off and that moved you to the freelance. But I'm curious about even before that. Had you thought about, like, is that what you wanted to do? I talk to a lot of artists, or I just have friends in the spaces, and, like a lot of their dream is that they really would like just work for themselves and do amazing art and pick their clients and do whatever. Was that something that, that was a goal of yours or something you thought about before that transition happened?
It was, but it felt so terrifying and, uncertain to go that path. And, when I was just out of college, I don't think I was up to taking on that much of a challenge. It was nice to work at a place where you got a regular paycheck and sort of learned about just working in the adult world, and dealing with the different personalities and things like that. Like that goes a long way to help you become more successful in whatever you do later on. So I think it's everyone's dream as far as an artist to sort of create the things you want to create. And I think I was less concerned about how I went about doing that. So I wasn't against freelance, I don't think, but I don't think it was like my life goal right out of college.
Well, how did that though? You mentioned too, it's interesting, like, I mean, which made a lot of sense to me. You talked about the, maybe a little terrifying, but even you mentioned earlier about the, now you maybe came to freelance a little bit later in life. Mm-hmm. And, and because I recognize this, like this feels very similar or familiar to me where, the older you get, the more you do think, I actually need a regular income because I have a house to pay for or whatever the case is. So to me, there's almost a different sort of, terror there. But I'm curious, like, did it feel more like obtainable now that you were like a little bit more seasoned and understood things when that opportunity showed up?
Yeah, absolutely. It's one of those things I think, so many people go through, and it's a very similar thing for, I think, a lot of people making a change or things like that. But it's hard to get advice or to listen to other people's story and really relate it to yourself. It seems like unless it happens to you, the advice just kind of feels hollow or like, oh, well, that was you. That's not how it's going to go for me or something like that, whether that's positive or negative. So, like I said, I think because I had to do it, it took some of the fear out of it because I was more afraid of not working, of not making money, of having to move back home or something like that.
Yeah.
That really motivates you to like, well, you've got to step up here. No one else is going to step in and help you out here. You've got to make your own work. So I think that was really the main motivator for me to do it more so than the fear.
Yeah, that's a great motivation when you don't really have a lot of other choices.
Yeah.
It's kind of true. I think that's when, I don't know, at least for me, when I'm pressured, maybe that's why deadlines work so well for me. Because when I have that deadline, like I'm hustling now.
Yeah.
If you give me extra time, I'll probably take the extra time.
Absolutely. I think that's most people, though.
Yeah.
So yeah, I definitely work better with some kind of, framework, or like you said, like a deadline or a challenge of some sort, as opposed to just do whatever you want to do whenever you want to do it. That's tough.
I feel like I kind of get lost in that. Like, freedom, like time, I don't know, it evaporates or something.
Yeah.
I don't know. I feel like I've been busy. Well, what about I make this sound also serious, but I'm just really curious about this just because I think that I'm really fascinated by your creativity, but it just seems so sound, your business sense as well. So I find for creative people that I've known as well, even for myself sometimes, that like the business side of things, like it's all great to create and do the things that you need to do, but there's self-promotion, there's, marketing, social, there's just so many pieces of that. What's it like for you to manage that business side of your world?
The specific business side is not fun for me. The numbers, the taxes, that kind of stuff, just drives me absolutely crazy. And I'm fortunate that I have sort of other people in my life that I can trust with that task, whether that's hiring someone to do your taxes or just having someone who can do accounting or set up, an easy accounting system for you. So that I can focus on the stuff that I really want to do. I don't have time to stop and understand everything about the tax system and all that. So I really do rely on other people to make up for those shortcomings on my part. But the social media part of it, I find that kind of fun. I don't mind doing the actual posting and things like that. Self-promotion can be a little queasy at first, but you start to see how necessary it is. And that if you want people to see this stuff, you've got to get it out there. And again, it goes back to that thing, like it's sitting back and being passive about it isn't going to get you anywhere. You might be more comfortable, but it's not going to get people to see your work. And that's really the goal. So I think as long as you keep that goal in front of you, it becomes less uncomfortable to sort of talk about yourself on social media. And you have more options nowadays, I think, than we ever did before. So you can make it seem more casual and more personal rather than just sending out a postcard or just sending out announcements about your work. You can kind of weave it into your personal life so that it seems like you're just letting people know about stuff rather than jamming it down their throat.
Yeah, absolutely. You're so right. And then even the mediums that you can pick that, I know a lot of people that are probably on majority of the larger social media networks, but you can also pick the ones that really feel a little bit more, connected to you. Maybe it's not Snapchat and you want to do something that's, like that, and you can choose a different medium. So I think you're right. There's moving from the flyer big promotion to the more personalized things.
Right.
And there's probably a mix with that, I would imagine too. Even just, you as a freelancer, you're not a large corporation. You're an artist who's creating great work, but you're also an artist. You're a person. So, there's not I would imagine, a big separation there. It is kind of personal for you.
Yeah, it is personal. I mean, I always think, and I'm sure you've found this too, that there is sort of there's a side of your personality, of your sort of persona that you put forward for this public facing side of things,
Yeah.
And so it's kind of you, but it's not all of you for sure. And it's as long as you can sort of balance that, I think it can stay sort of, I don't know. It's like everyone's saying now that, you can't have that divide between personal tweets and public tweets, right? It's all out there. So you kind of have to be conscious no matter what you're doing and maybe not express every opinion that that crosses your mind. So, but I find that fun. I think I'm not, that doesn't feel like work to me when I have to do that stuff. I feel like it is part of the job, but I think if you can make it fun, then it can be rewarding.
Yeah. I think I could probably see that even through the stuff that you share. I mean, obviously, a lot of it's your work, but I also see things that you've shared, like on Facebook and whatnot, which are some like hilarious videos, a product or something somewhere, and I think that's just good stuff. So I can see that like for me, because I do a lot of that sort of thing as well. And it's
Right.
the discovery for me actually of finding some of that stuff is actually half the fun. Like I get lost and like, this is hilarious. And I'm can't wait to share this with people. So, just thinking about your overall career going kind of just, spanning, even though we haven't covered it all, and I don't want to go in full detail, but I'm just, I'm really kind of curious because we've talked about this like one moment in time, like the Hipster Mickey, and then what the future has been a little bit for you. But are there any moments over your career that like really stand out for you?
There's some like personal little things that have stood out. There are bigger things like, working for Disney, it's so high profile and it introduces your work to people that you just would never have thought you would have been able to reach. And so when I go and do these like signings at Wonderground and things like that, I'm every time I go, I'm blown away by the response and that people are going to wait in line to have me sign the art and things like that. It's gratifying and it's humbling at the same time. And you're so appreciative that people are taking time out of their day and spending money on this stuff. There's some validation in that as well. It can be a bit of a slippery slope though, if that's going to be the way you gauge the success of something or not. But you can't help but sort of be taken in by all of that's happening in front of you. So things like that have been big. Just getting to work for Disney and work with these characters and to be associated with the company in some way has been something that I had dreamed about for quite a while. So for that to happen was completely fulfilling.
Well, yeah, that's amazing. It's curious too that you talked about that, like that slippery slope. I'd love for you could you expand on that a little bit more? I mean, I hear this a lot about just different podcasts I listen to as well. And, just this external validation, like really being really careful about that. If that's what you're looking after, is that kind of what you mean? Something around that, like external piece?
Absolutely. I've said this before, I'm an illustrator, and I think when you're an illustrator, it more than implies that you are illustrating for an audience. This is not fine art in that I can't just create something and say this is personal and this is me and like it or hate it. It's very much with an audience in mind. So from that perspective, you're looking for people to like your work, to respond to your work in some positive way. But that doesn't necessarily mean that everything's going to be received the same way. So if I do another piece for Disney and it's not received as well as Hipster Mickey is, I don't think I can look at it as a failure, but I think there is a tendency to want to do that you're not reaching the same amount of people and getting the same amount of hits on an image and things like that can sort of creep in there if you're not keeping everything sort of in check.
Have you always been like, have you always thought that, or did that take time? Did you ever get trapped in, looking at those numbers or looking at that validation?
Well, I think that's one of the things with the internet and the technology now that we didn't have that as an option before. Everything is so tracked now. You can see exactly what's happening, when it's happening in real time. And it's easy to get swept up in that. But I don't think I did before, only because it wasn't as readily available as it is now. So I think there was a time when it was more important to me and when I really kept a close eye on what was happening. But now I kind of just, I'll check in every now and then just to kind of, get a gauge of what's happening, but I don't depend on that at all.
Yeah, and that's so smart. You're right. This wasn't the case before. We didn't have these numbers. It is interesting. I've heard this from people that are just starting to see like an increase in, I don't want to say popularity, but at least like followers or people engaged in whatever they're doing. And, I've heard this from some YouTubers as well. It's almost a number game. But then after a while, they do recognize like, you just can't do that. You got to check in to make sure things are working. But yeah, you have to really find that validation and what you're doing or why you're doing it somewhere else. So
absolutely.
Important.
I think, and it goes back to one of my thoughts always on this stuff is you have to be sort of sincere about your work. If you're letting that stuff creep in, then you're not, you're basing your concepts and things like that on what you think is going to be popular as opposed to what you sort of feel when you're doing it. And then once you start down that path, I think it's hard to make heads or tails of anything after that. So
it's true. You kind of lose yourself then.
Yeah.
You really have to be authentic to what I don't know, I'm a big believer in do the things that you really love, and people will love that versus you trying to chase what we think they want.
Yeah, I think whether people recognize that in those specific words, that's questionable. But I think people get a sense of the sincerity behind it, and they can sort of sniff out if you're being sort of fake about something or just, trying to give them what you think they want, as opposed to just doing something from the heart.
Yeah, absolutely. Thinking about just being that authentic and doing I know, like doing the work that you really want to do, and focus on the art that you want, even though knowing that you have an audience. I'm curious about, especially I love to ask this question about people that are creatives, because I think I think everybody's a little creative, but for the people that aren't working in that world, I think those folks look at creatives and you're their inspiration. So I'm always curious about creatives, like, where do you find inspiration? Is it other creatives, or are there any specifics that you look at that kind of, inspire your world?
Well, I'm kind of a fanboy at heart. So like I'm a huge Disney fan, even before I started doing work for the company, and like a lot of people are. So Disney is a constant source of inspiration for me, from the movies and the just everything that they do, and definitely other creators and people outside of Disney, obviously, too, but illustrators that are working. There's so many people that I look at, and it's always very inspiring. You can look at someone else's work and feel completely lazy, and it really motivates you to like step up your game, because you're seeing these other people doing amazing work. And it's not that you want to do the exact same work that they're doing, but you feel like, okay, it looks like they're putting in 200%. I've got to put in 300% then, so it's inspiring and it's motivating, and I'm constantly looking at other people's work.
Is there anybody in particular that you really are drawn to their work out there?
There's a guy by the name of Joey Chu who does work for Wonderground Gallery as well. He does a lot of Disney work, but his work is just gorgeous stuff. And I am constantly inspired by what he does and how much he does. And I've had the chance to meet him a few times and talk with him. And he's just the nicest, most humble guy in the world. And it's just, I don't know. The more I admire someone's work, you kind of tend to build them up in your head, and you think they're going to be these prima donnas or something like that. So I'm always blown away when they're these down-to-earth people like that. So it's a pleasure to work with him and to know him, and to just be inspired by what he does.
Yeah, absolutely. I think actually I just looked at his work the other day. I believe this is the gentleman I was looking at, and it was actually through your Instagram account. I believe that's where I saw something, and I was like, oh, who's this?
Yeah, he does really cute stuff too. Our work isn't similar. It is sometimes mistaken for each other's works at the gallery and stuff, but once you really start looking at his work, you know that they're quite different.
Yeah.
But yeah, does amazing work.
I just have to go back for a second. I chuckled, and I was trying to be really quiet, because when you said, when you really admire people's work, you build them up a little bit, and then you realize, oh, they're so humble. Yeah, that's the moment I'm having today. So I just thought that was funny. When I'm like, yeah, I know what you're talking about.
Oh, that's very generous of you.
I mean, I could tell that you were, I think, down to earth and humble as well. You can see that actually just through your interactions online, but it's very different than, seeing that online. As you said, we sometimes put a slice of our personality, or part of our personality, online, and not all of it. So it's different than talking to somebody and like, oh, you really do sound like that. So it's nice to have that.
Well, thank you.
We talked a lot about, obviously, your Disney work and stuff. I'm really curious about, I know you've done work for, like, I think it's like Facebook and Warner Brothers, and the list goes on, Nickelodeon and stuff. Are there other kind of things that you want to tackle, or characters, or things that you're like, hey, I'm loving the Disney work, but in addition, I would also love, like, maybe on some sort of checklist or bucket list that you'd love to tackle?
Yeah, there's always stuff that I want to do. I mean, I would definitely like to create some kind of cast of characters that are my own and that I can sort of, do as I wish with. But I do enjoy working with existing properties and things like that. So I don't mean to say that that's any lesser than doing that. I know people tend to think like, well, don't you want to do your own stuff? And I do. I think most artists do, but I really do enjoy the type of work that I'm doing. And it's, when you're in the thick of it, it's hard to step away.
Yeah.
And I know I can't really focus on something else unless I were to sort of dramatically step away from what I was doing. And I don't think that I'm there yet. I'm not ready to sort of stop what I'm doing yet. Maybe eventually I'll get to that point where I'm just ready to be my own boss when it comes to these characters and things like that. But right now I've been happy with the balance of work that I've been able to do.
Yeah, that makes sense too. And I'm glad to hear that. Actually, I'm glad to hear there's two parts that, you have thought about maybe creating your own cast of characters. But, I always think that you can't stretch yourself as well. If you want really quality, great work, if you're in the thick of it, you can't really focus on the other stuff. I heard this podcast the other day where a gentleman talked about, he just took so long because he had a full-time, staff job. And then on the side, he was creating this little show of his own. And it took him, I think, 3 years to get it done. And he was like, it was whatever it was. Like, it still was great. But afterwards, he said, you know what? I can't take 3 years to do the next piece. Like, it's just taking too long. And he really did. It was like a little animated short about possums. And so I found that really interesting, where you have to pick and choose where you want to be. So there's some truth there's a lot of truth in what you said about that.
Well, I think, especially as I get older, you start finding that your sanity is more important than just about anything else. And, when you're younger, you can do these all-nighters and just go crazy and try to do a million things. But I think as you get older, you start, you can't stretch yourself as thin and expect the same results. It just gets harder, and the payoff isn't as much as you'd hope it'd be, and things like that. So, it depends. It's different for everyone, I'm sure. But I think, that good life-work balance, no matter what you're doing, is vital.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, that makes me think about, there's a question I have asked many others about, and I'm going to reframe the question, but the question I usually ask is, what kind of advice would you offer somebody who's just thinking about starting that career or joining in that? But I'd actually love to reframe that a little bit, because just based on what you said. So, like, what's some advice you would offer to maybe somebody who is like mid-career but haven't yet maybe made that break into like full-time art? Especially thinking about balance, sanity, like what's next for them? How do they actually maybe tackle something but still keep sane?
Yeah, that's a question, and it's a very sort of personal question. I think, I don't have kids. And that makes a huge difference. People around my age or so usually have kids, and that's a whole other full-time job to do on top of it. And I couldn't tell someone who's in that position to just drop what you're doing and follow that dream. Your kids become your dream now, and then you're kind of in service to them. And I think that's a different situation. If someone is just purely doing art and they have the capability of sort of doing a career switch at this point, it'll never not be scary. I could just say that. Like, you can't wait for a time when you think, oh, this is the right time. The universe is telling me this is what I should do. It's always going to be scary and terrifying and hard, and you're just not going to be able to escape that. So I don't know. I guess, you have to make that decision based on your own personal, what's really going to motivate you to get that? Does that mean that you are willing at age, whatever, 35, 40 to move back home and start over?
Yeah.
If you are, that's fantastic. Then I'd say do it, because you'll be happy, I think, that you pursued something that you love. But that's a very personal decision. And I would feel terrible to encourage someone to do that if that wasn't right. But yeah, just prepare, work hard and do what you can to go towards that goal. Don't talk about it endlessly and, make all these sort of procrastinating plans to sort of keep you from actually diving in. You have to do it. Whether that's just promising that you're going to do a new drawing every day and post it on Instagram, or whether that means, going back to school or something like that. That's, you have to kind of just do it.
I also love that you said it's always going to be scary. I think that's a true reality, and it's like, if you're waiting for another day, you have more money, you have more security, like that doesn't always really help.
Yeah, no, I think especially with art, for me at least. I mean, that's the only thing I can speak to is it's a very personal thing, and it's hard not to be sort of heartbroken if people aren't responding to what you're putting out. And that's again something you have to take into consideration because it's not easy, and it's fantastic when things are going well, but it can get pretty dark if things aren't going well. If you can't seem to get a break, or if your artwork just isn't landing with people in the way that you want to, because you don't have a lot of control over that. So I don't know. It's a tough balance that I think you have to look at what you feel personally, but also what people are responding to.
Yeah, absolutely. It's a lot to consider. I started to think about. I would be curious about your advice on this, or just at least maybe not advice, but maybe just your perspective. Thinking about, I lived in Los Angeles for so many years, and working at the Walt Disney Company as well, and I was surrounded by all these artists, and then I knew people at Cartoon Network and whatever, and those were staff jobs for sure. So they needed to be in that space that was in LA. They needed to be wherever that studio was. So you're a freelancer and you're living in Sacramento, which does not seem to me to be the hub of creativity. Nothing against Sacramento. I'm sure you figured this out. I'm not very far from there, actually.
Right.
So, and I'm not in the hub of like entertainment at all either, but I'm doing it. So does it matter at all, in, this era, where you're at, what you're doing? Do you need to be close to a hub of any sort, or, because not knowing your world, maybe there is something that you're able to do. So I'm just curious about that, especially since you're working for a company that's based in Los Angeles.
Right. I think it depends on what you want to do. If you want to go into animation specifically, like work for the studios, you have to go to the studios. There's no way around that. If you're going to do what I'm doing as far as illustration and illustration for industry, I think you can live pretty much anywhere because of, digital files and everything now. It's not about bringing physical paintings into the office, which it used to be. You used to have to live close to the studios to do any kind of work for them. So, but now I think just because of the technology, we're able to, most of the jobs are, and I think they prefer it now. They don't want to have huge offices where they're paying paying for this real estate and things like that. So I feel like the model is definitely moving more towards everyone being a freelancer to a certain degree.
Does that feel like freedom for you to have that, to be able to, like, not, I assume it's a choice for you, obviously, to live in Sacramento versus like, maybe like a LA or something like that. Because, so do you feel like that's a freedom for you as a freelancer as well?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, it's expensive to live in Los Angeles, and it's expensive to live in Silicon Valley and things like that. So if I can, as an artist, do what I'm doing and be able to afford a house and just the general cost of living, without being broke, just because you're living in the most expensive city in the United States, then yeah, that's a huge advantage. I think the main thing for me though is, as much as I like people, working in the office is a completely different, situation, and I don't miss that part of it. You do get a little stir crazy sometimes being by yourself all day and working, in front of your computer. But on one of my contracts a few years ago, I did have to go into the office for a few days, and I forgot how much I hated it. So, I don't miss that part. And then you're left out of a lot of the politics of working in an organization, and they're just coming to you for the work. And I think that for me is ideal. Like, just tell me what you need, and I don't need to be at all the meetings.
I agree. That has been my world recently. Where I'm working with one client that I go in one day a week. And it's enough to give me people time. Yeah. And then the rest of the time I can be at home and I'm doing my things and I'm like, oh, this is lovely. I don't have to deal with all that other stuff, but I still can get the interaction that I need when I want it.
Sure.
Yeah. So nice. So let me ask this. There's this question I have been really just interested in. I've been asking a couple of different people this, and it's similar to like the inspiration, but really, is there something like recently that is bringing you value that you're enjoying, like a show, a book, or something like that you've been enjoying that's somehow spoken to you recently? Like
I said, I'm constantly looking for inspiration, and it's not just artists. It's in everything. So like I listen to podcasts all day long while I'm doing my work. That's always on in the background, and I try to keep up with TV shows and things like that. I've gotten into audiobooks a lot lately. I think one of the main things for me is just seeing people doing amazing work, whether that's in art, whether that's in film or TV or something like that. When you see something that moves you and that you're just impressed by, and it's something original and different, that's always inspiring. And it doesn't have to just be exactly what I'm doing. It's just like someone's working at the top of their game, and that makes you want to step up too and sort of either look at what you're doing and how you're doing it. How can you change this? How can you get to that next level? But just to to see people doing what they love and doing it well, it's just this great reminder to stay focused.
Absolutely. Is there one thing that you've been really enjoying lately that you feel like, yeah, these folks are at the top of their game, like a podcast or a show or something?
Gosh, that's a good question. Something like, okay, so I listened to the audiobook of Devil in the White City. I don't know if you've read that. And it has nothing to do with art or anything like that, but it's just this amazing work that combines these two disparate subjects of the Chicago World's Fair and this serial killer that's happening at the same time in the background. But the way that the author was able to sort of blend these two stories together and to have it packed full of all this historical stuff, and like that's just a huge monster. And I'm always in awe of people that are able to sort of take that much information and make it into this cohesive entertainment thing. I think if I could bring complexity to what I'm doing and to make it look that simple, like I'm inspired. Like that's the inspiration I got from something like that. That's so different than illustration, but still I find very inspiring.
That's actually why I asked that question, because it may sometimes seem, I think, a little bit out of the blue, because it's sure we would talk about your career, where you've been going. There's two things I always like to think about that. First of all, I'm just really curious, like when people that I find really fascinating, I want to know, like, what are the products? What are the things that you're really into right now? What's like the show that's like hot on your DVR or Netflix list? But because it's just curious to get recommendations. But the other piece of it is it helps us have a clue of how you actually look at something, or like it really does. Like, oh, like if you talk to somebody and they love junior fiction, like it kind of it blends into like, oh, now I kind of get where your thinking is. So I think it's fascinating because I also am like, oh, I actually wrote it down. I'm like, oh, let me look up that book. I have not seen this yet. So, I'm probably going to check it out.
Yeah. I mean, it's not light reading at all. And
No, clearly.
But just, I think it's a good example of something that it's completely different than what I do, but very inspiring. But I mean, I like a bunch of stuff. So I go see like the Star Wars film and I'm inspired. I'll watch Game of Thrones and I'm inspired. But every now and then you come across something that really kind of blows you away.
Yeah, absolutely. No, and I agree. Like we're not, obviously just one degree of something, but we like, yes, because I like some of the silliest things, but then it's ultra sensitive or serious. Yeah, absolutely. Oh my gosh, this has been such a terrific conversation. I think that it's really fascinating to hear like your perspective on things, and it's been a little bit different than everybody else I've talked to. So that's been really fun for me.
Oh, well, thank you. I appreciate it. I mean, I've listened to your podcast. I've listened to all the episodes, and it's been a really interesting mix of people. So I'm honored to be in that mix. So thank you for having me.
Absolutely. And that's actually kind of my goal is I'm not focused on just one audience, and I'm trying to keep the connective thread, if you will, through the whole thing is really just how, people are just, they're living a life that they really love, and it may not be, unicorns and rainbows every day.
Right.
But they're making intentional choices, and that's what's important. And so I love that the idea of, we can have an artist one week to, the most recent previous to you was somebody who's actually doing social impact, who's doing haircuts for the homeless on her spare time. I love that. So
absolutely. And I think I was just listening to the one you had with the gentleman who has the winery.
Oh yeah.
And what I liked about that one so much was that it showed so much about how much work everything is, and these sort of sacrifices that you make. It's not just like, I had a dream and I followed it and everything's perfect. It's like, you really have to make an effort, you have to make sacrifices and things like that. And I love that that was sort of emphasized in that, because I think that gets lost a lot of times in sort of this, media savvy approach to dreaming and things like that. Like, it's more than just, I have a dream. So
it's so true. That's exactly what I met him through, like a little private wine tasting kind of by accident. And when he mentioned it, I was like, oh, so you're like the real deal.
Yeah.
Like, it's not like I had a dream and I'm going to plant some grapes and then a week later I, had a winery. It's been I wouldn't say a struggle, but it's been years of this. And it's funny, I just went to his, he and his wife had at their winery, they just had a little spring welcoming for all their new wines and stuff. And to see how many people had shown up for this little winery in Marin County, I was almost proud of the guy. I thought, look at you. You really followed something, even if it was hard.
Right. Yeah, absolutely. And I think that is more so than any figures or numbers or how much money he's able to make on it. The fact that he sort of set out to do this thing and did it, to me, that's the most exciting part of his story.
Yeah, I agree. And I think you could see he was smiling ear to ear. And something he had shared with me afterwards was that it's to see the enjoyment of others, because he knows the product he's creating now is something that people actually really do enjoy. Otherwise, they wouldn't be showing up. I wouldn't buy his wine.
Right.
So he had shared that, he did set out to do this thing, and now people can enjoy it with him. So I think that's a lovely, lovely story. Great way to end that. Well, again, so much fun. I appreciate all of this and insight and taking the time from your illustration to chat with me.
Absolutely.
And I'm sure that, I'm going to talk to you later because I will probably bug you somewhere online. So it's not the last that you've heard of us.
Well, great. I'm happy. And I'll be listening to your episodes.
That's so great. Thanks so much, Jerrod.
Thank you.
Oh, before I let you go, I don't know why I didn't ask this, even though we will share it. Where's the main places online that you would like others to follow you on?
So my website is jmaruyama.com, and you can kind of link from there to my Instagram and Facebook and Twitter and things like that. But that's probably the best place to start.
Great. Yeah, and we'll offer all that as well.
Great.
Sounds so good. Thanks so much.
Thank you, Christopher.
Now, over to you. Any thoughts or questions you'd like to share? Seriously, do you have any questions you'd like to ask me or the guest? We'll answer them and even get the guest to help us. So send us a message, use our Facebook page and email us there, or post a comment or question on the page, or tweet us at accidentalinfo using hashtag #livingyourjourney. You can find out more about all the guests, links to their sites and social channels, and even bonus content all at accidentalinformation.com. Now, a couple favors. Go subscribe to the show and you'll be the first to get the download before everyone else. Also, take just a couple moments and head over to the show in iTunes or wherever you listen to podcasts and give us a quick review. Quick, easy, and I would love it. This totally supports us and it helps me bring in interesting guests each week and keeps the show going. Also, I love to read them and see what you guys are really thinking. Thanks for joining the conversation, and remember, Living Your Journey is available every Tuesday. Until next week.